So that's hardly Mahalia Jackson, and I really apologize. I had technical difficulties, could not do the thing I wanted to do to bring that to us. I have learned something, but I still can't do it, so my apologies. And we'll just sort of take a deep breath together for a moment as people get in and get settled. It's absolutely lovely to see you all here today.
I have to tell you, I did volunteer to sing "Oh Freedom," but since I can't carry a tune, Nancy said no. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Westside Congregation. I'm Kathy Wright, Service Associate for today. Our service is a special one, so please listen closely as I tell you a little bit about what you have to look forward to. Today is the last Sunday of Black History Month. Later today, we hope you join us at the Martin Luther King Jr. Community Service at 4 o'clock. Throughout our service today, we will be sharing stories with you, stories of the Black community that are rarely known or told, especially in predominantly white settings. As you use, we affirm racial justice in all of its forms. Familiarizing ourselves with the stories of the Black community is just one way for us to work toward that goal. We'll hear more about the power of story and how it shapes us later during the sermon. For now, just know that you will hear a series of stories interspersed throughout the service in unexpected places. Most are marked in your bulletin, so you will know who the speakers are. Our service is founded on principles 1 and 2, the inherent worth, the inherent worth and dignity of every person, and justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. We hope you will encounter new ways of living those out through our program today. Our speaker is our consulting minister, the Reverend Dr. Nancy Hitt. Today we thank Bram and Roxy Cass-Heck for greeting us at the door and equipping us with the bulletins. Steve Poloni for videotaping our service, and Dana Sanford for monitoring our sound system. I saw somebody else handing out. That was Jack?
Walters.
Jim?
Jan
Walters. Okay, thank you, since your name's on here. Okay, here's our first story. The story is about Phyllis Wheatley, the first African American to publish a book. Phyllis Wheatley came from Africa on a slave ship and landed in Boston, Massachusetts in 1761 when she was about 8 years old. She was bought by a rich man named John Wheatley, who took her to live with his family. Although Phyllis could not speak English when she arrived, the Wheatleys taught her to read and write. She was a very bright child, and she especially loved to write poetry. When she was just a teenager, she wrote a poem about the death of a popular minister, which was reprinted many times. 2 years later, the Wheatleys tried to publish a book of her poems, but the publisher did not believe that Phyllis was the real poet because she was a slave. With one of the Wheatley sons, she sailed to England, where her book of poems was finally published in 1773. It was the first book to be published by an African American. After she returned to America, Phyllis continued to write poetry. She wrote a poem for George Washington when he was made head of the Army in 1775, and he invited her to visit him at his headquarters. But soon after that, her life became filled with sadness. One by one, the members of the Wheatley family died, and she was left alone. She married a man who treated her badly, and she had 2 children who died. She and her 3rd baby both died on the same day, in December 1784. May we learn from and remember Phyllis Wheatley. Here are the announcements for today. This afternoon at 4 p.m., our community service honoring Martin Luther King Jr. will be held at the New Covenant Worship Center on 4504 8th Way Southeast, Rio Rancho. Clergy from a variety of Rio Rancho churches will be participating, and the Honorable Judge Shamara Henderson will be the keynote speaker. Please bring a donation of non-perishable food if you would like to contribute to Mother Milford Reynolds Pantry. Please speak to Reverend Nancy if you need more information. Next Sunday, March 6th, our adult religious education classes will meet under the direction of Reverend Judy Douche from 9 a.m. to 9:45 a.m. in the conference room to begin. Just a minute, I missed a page here. Excuse me. Oops, there we go. A discussion of the book Summer at the End of the World. If you'd like more information about this or help ordering the book, please speak to either Reverend Judy or Reverend Nancy. Also next Sunday, our religious education number 2 class will convene at 9:50 under the direction of Jay Kane. This class will offer the question and answer follow-up to yesterday's class titled Gender, Sex, and Sexuality. You may attend this discussion even if you weren't able to attend the class. The next informational class is scheduled for March 19th at 10 a.m. in the social hall. Are there any other announcements that need to be brought to our attention?
If you're
I'm supposed to take this, right?
I'll do it.
I don't know how to get it off. Don't. Sorry.
There you go.
If you're interested,
No.
hello? No?
Wait, no, it's off now. It needs to be green.
If you're interested in the origins of race, KUNM archive for Thursday, February 25th, I think, at 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. It was a fascinating journey through how race was established, and it was great. You should totally listen to it.
Thank you. Any others? Okay.
Okay, is that good? All of them? Okay. Okay. Please stand as you are able and join us in lighting our chalice. In your programs is the next part. Our chalice flame leaps high, illuminating the darkness both within and outside of our minds. May it consume all that hinders truth and justice. May it empower equity and equality. In everything, may it draw us closer to becoming fully human, recognizing ourselves in every person's eyes. Shalom.
Now, if you would pick up your hymnal and open it to number 148. We have our very own UU Song of Freedom. I think some of us are familiar with the melody, so here's what we're going to do. I'll warble us through the first verse, and if we do okay, we'll keep on going. And if it's too painful, you know, just wave at me and let me know, and we'll simply read it after that. Is that agreeable, or do you just want to read?
No, sing.
Sing. Okay, good. Let freedom stand both east and west, and love both south and north, in universal fellowship, through those notes. In beauty, wonder everywhere, let us communion find. Compassion be the golden cord, close binding all mankind. Beyond all barriers of race, of color, caste, or creed, let us make friendship, human worth, our common faith and deed. Then east and west will meet and share, and south shall build with north. One human commonwealth of good throughout the whole wide earth. Thank you. Now if you would take your bulletin up again. Let us affirm our aspirations together. Life is a gift. We gather in community to celebrate the glories and the mysteries of this great gift. In the light of truth and in the warmth of love, we gather to seek, to sustain, and to share. Love is the doctrine of this congregation. The quest for truth is our sacrament, and service is our prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve others in community, to the end that all souls grow into harmony with creation. Thus do we covenant with one another. Shalom. Please be seated.
Okay, so I'm going to read about Mary Ann Shade Carey. She was born in 1823 in Wilmington, Delaware. Her parents were not slaves, and they helped other African Americans by a hiding place in their home, by offering a hiding place in their home to those who were escaping slavery in the South. Because of her race, Mary Ann was unable to receive an education in Delaware, so she attended a Quaker school in Pennsylvania. After graduation at the age of 16, she returned to Wilmington and opened a school for African American students. In 1850, the Fugitive Slave Law was passed, which gave slave owners the right to search for and capture runaway slaves. Because they were opposed to the law, Mary Ann and her family moved out of the country to Windsor, Canada. Soon after her arrival there, Mary Ann saw a need for a newspaper for African Americans, especially those who had escaped from slavery. She began publishing a weekly paper called The Provincial Freeman. This achievement made her the first African American newspaper woman in North America. Mary Ann Shade Carey always spoke out against slavery. When President Abraham Lincoln called for men to fight with the Union Army in the Civil War, Mary Ann returned to the United States and helped recruit soldiers for the Army. She later moved to Washington, D.C. and enrolled in Howard University Law School. In 1883, she became the second African American woman in the country to earn a law degree. May we learn from and remember Mary Ann Shade Carey.
I invite you now to join me in pursuing a moment for centering. Sit back in your pew, in your chair, if you're at home or wherever you might be. Relax and breathe deeply. Uncross your ankles, your knees, your wrists. And close your eyes or choose a focal point for your gaze. Focus on your breath, breathing in deeply, filling your lungs with air. Breathe out fully, releasing tension, anxiety. Breathe in and out, relaxing any tension you notice in your body. Let your mind go blank. As stray thoughts appear, brush them aside for another time. Breathe in deeply. Breathe out fully. And now allow an image of racial justice to take form in your mind. It may be a picture or a song, a person, a poem, a story, or a headline. Let it unfold in your mind's eye. What is it that speaks to you of race in your image? What is it that speaks to you of justice in that image? Examine your experience of the image that comes to your mind. Positive, negative, peaceful, relieved, triumphant, glad, proud. Whatever it is that you are feeling in your response to your image, make note of it. File both the image and your experience of it in your memory, where you can access it safely in the future. And begin to return your focus to your breath. Breathing in and breathing out. Relaxed in your body. And when you are ready, open your eyes and return to the here and now. Shalom.
Sharing our joys and concerns. Each time we meet, we set aside time to share our joys and concerns, to connect with each other about the important matters of our lives. For each one, we light a candle. If you are joining us online, you may light your own personal candle at any time, or wait until we light our last candle to speak your concerns aloud. Nancy will bring you the mic as you raise your hand for it.
Actually, you
No, it's
can
me.
do that.
It's Nancy.
She has oxygen, so I'm playing with fire.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. No fire for me.
Good morning, everybody. My concern is for world peace. My concern is for world peace. I'm very affected by what's going on in Ukraine and Russia. And I feel sorry for the people of both countries because we know that a lot of the people even in Russia, they don't want this war. One man wants this war. So anyway, let's just keep them in our thoughts and prayers as much as we can, and hopefully it's not going to get worse. Thank you.
Well, I have a joy to share, and I'd like you to know that Feed Rio Rancho Kids and UU Westside was featured in the Rio Rancho Observer this week. And I'm always happy when they actually print an article that I have submitted. And it's posted on the bulletin board for everybody to take a look at it.
Thank you.
I have what is both a joy and a concern. My dad had a mild heart attack last Monday. He had an angiogram on Tuesday, went home on Wednesday, and he's home recovering. He has to change his diet. He thinks he's gonna be able to get away with not changing his diet. He lives with my mom, who's a retired nurse. It's not happening. He's a little on the stubborn side, but he underestimates a woman who spent most of her career working with young children.
My concern is for the Ukrainians. I hope they survive. And I don't trust the meeting tomorrow. I think the Russians may try and capture the Ukrainian negotiators.
I'm gonna paint my nails when I get back.
My nails.
I have a concern about the Ukrainians too. I noticed that one lady had a parrot on her shoulder, and she was traveling with her bird. But I haven't noticed a lot of pets, and I hope they're not all left behind.
They're taking them. A lot of people are taking them.
Oh.
Yeah.
And certain countries are letting the Ukrainians cross the border with the pets. Poland especially. Okay.
I too am very concerned about the Ukrainian people and also all those Russian people who know what a terrible thing their country is doing. But I do have a joy, and that is that I had the great fortune of knowing Jacob Trapp, who wrote the words to our hymn this morning. And I first met him at a square dance. He wrote the dance. When Marshall and I first moved into New Jersey, somehow we knew about the square dance, we went. Jacob Trapp was the minister of a church, I think in Somerville, New Jersey, but I wouldn't swear that that was the right name. But it was near Morristown, where we lived. And we went there until we formed the Morristown Unitarian Fellowship.
I'm going to go for another candle for the Ukrainians, in particular, the citizens that are taking up arms.
Yeah.
And with such pride. And I want to say, you know, I'm a healthy 71-year-old woman. And if it was my country, I'd be out there too, if they'd let me. I'd be taking up arms. So, I'm for the warriors. Oh, I just thought.
Our baby Kieran, turned 6 months old, and now he is eating food. Baby's eating food. That's great.
I have a concern and a joy. And first, a word for the Ukrainians who took to their president's request to change or take down all the street signs, and they all request the Russians do something
Yeah.
to themselves. My concern is something that turned into a joy. Last Saturday night in Portland, Oregon, there was a shooting at a Black Lives Matters march. The woman who was shot, June Knightley, is a very dear friend of mine. I've known her and her wife for easily 15, 20 years. And I wasn't in church because I learned about it right before, and the joy that came was from one who told me, and then we started reaching out to others because nobody wanted anybody to find out online. At that point, she was simply an unnamed victim. And so in doing so, I reconnected with a multitude of friends, and we're texting one another and messaging one another and keeping in touch. And I heard from Kat, who's June's wife, just yesterday, and she was apologizing for not reaching out sooner, and I was like, you got enough on your plate. So my concern is for somebody who would think it was okay to walk up to a woman in a car. She wouldn't have a car because she doesn't walk without a cane. She survived cancer twice. And he shot her from a distance that is closer than she is standing to me now. But she wasn't alone. Somebody stayed with her, and that brought me joy also. So a concern and a joy.
I have one.
It's on.
It's on, okay. I also have a concern. My sister contacted me to ask for whatever psycho-spiritual help might be available on behalf of healthcare workers who find themselves in a variety of odd positions. She is a nurse and is expecting there to be a lot of layoffs in her job setting. Not frontline, but nonetheless still a great concern to those who make their livelihood through healthcare and the rest of the system that needs all the backup support it can get. So given the pandemic is ongoing, even though we are not in lockdown, etc., our healthcare workers still need our love and concern on all levels. And I will light one last candle for all that we still hold in the privacy of our own hearts and minds.
We light this red candle in witness on behalf of all victims of racial violence, for those who suffer from oppression, exclusion, verbal and physical abuse, economic deprivation, or any sort of violence that harms their personal integrity due to their race. We stand in solidarity, condemning all aspects of racism. Shalom.
Today I'm going to talk about Hiram Rhodes Revels. When he was a young boy in Fayette, North Carolina, when he was born in 1822, Hiram Rhodes Revels attended an elementary school run by an African-American woman. He moved north where he studied to become a minister. He served as pastor for churches in several states, and when the Civil War broke out, he was living in Baltimore, Maryland. Revels helped in the war effort by organizing 2 African-American Army regiments. After the war, opportunities opened up for African-Americans to serve in government offices. Hiram Revels settled in Natchez, Mississippi, where he became active in politics, serving on the city council and in the state senate. In January of 1870, the Mississippi legislators selected Revels to represent the state in the United States Senate. He was chosen to fill a Senate seat that had been empty ever since Jefferson Davis left it in 1861 to become president of the Confederacy. Excuse me. White Southerners spoke up and said they didn't want a black man in the Senate, but Revels did not back down. He became the first African American to serve in the U.S. Senate. In his first speech before Congress, Revels urged that the state of Georgia not be readmitted to the Union unless it protected the rights of its African American citizens. He served for a year in the Senate and later became president of Alcorn University, an African American college in Mississippi. May we learn and remember Hiram Rhodes Revels.
Now I invite Grant to share our animal ministry moment with us.
I have something about dogs and cats today. It came to me that every time I lose a dog, they take a piece of my heart with them. And every new dog who comes into my life gifts me with a piece of their heart. If I live long enough, all the components of my heart will be dog. And I will be as generous and loving as they are. Now this is a cat, big difference. It's called Forever. I could lie by your side for the rest of our lives. I think I'll walk away right now. I could let you pet me 100 years. I think we need some time apart. I could be kissed 1,000 times. I think I'm needed somewhere else. I could sit on your lap forever. I said I could sit on your lap forever. Don't you even think of trying to get up. Well, you should have gone to the bathroom beforehand. Because forever is a very, very long time.
For all of the many gifts each of us brings to our side, we thank you for your time, for your skills and talents, for gifts of material goods and financing. We thank you. It takes the whole community to make that happen. Does anyone need the basket passed around? I do. Then I turn it over to you, right?
Yes. Fine, I'll take it. Let's sing our customary song together.
From you I receive, to you I give, together we share, and from this we live.
Thank you.
This is the story of Jesse Owens. This record-breaking track star was born in 1913 in a small Alabama town. His parents, who were poor cotton farmers, named him Jesse Cleveland Owens. His family called him JC, which his teachers and friends later changed to Jesse. While he was still in elementary school, Jesse dreamed of someday going to college. To help him reach this goal, his parents moved to Cleveland, Ohio, where they would find better jobs. In Cleveland, Jesse's gym teacher started training him for the high school track team. He joined the team and began breaking many records. He continued his track career in college at Ohio State University, where he once set 3 world records in 1 hour. In 1936, Jesse Owens was chosen to compete in the Olympic Games, which were being held in Berlin, Germany. Adolf Hitler, who was the dictator of Nazi Germany at that time, wanted to prove that the Germans were the master race and could win all the contests. But Jesse Owens, an African American, proved Hitler wrong by winning 4 gold medals. It was the first time any athlete had won 4 gold medals in a single Olympics. When Owens returned to the United States, he was given a big parade in New York City. He then began an ordinary life, working at several different jobs to support his family. He died in 1980, but his victory at the Olympic Games in Germany will never be forgotten. May we learn from and remember Jesse Owens.
I invite you now to stand as you are able and open your hymnal to number 579. We are going to be reading responsibly The Limits of Tyranny, written by Frederick Douglass. 579. I will read the bold type if you will respond with the italics. Those who profess to favor freedom and yet deprecate agitation are people who want crops without plowing up the ground.
They want rain without thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the awful roar of its waters.
This struggle may be a moral one, or it may be both moral and physical, but it must be a struggle.
Power conceives nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will.
Find out what people will submit to, and you have found out the exact amount of injustice which will be imposed upon them.
The limits of tyrants are prescribed by the endurance of those whom they oppress.
Thank you. Please be seated. We have heard a lot of stories this morning, and we aren't done yet. This afternoon at the community service at 4 o'clock, we will hear a lot more of the story about Martin Luther King Jr. He was an amazing man. His story needs to be told and retold until our nation knows it by heart. Now I'm wondering how many of the other stories that you've heard so far this morning were familiar to us. Of the stories you've heard so far about America's black citizens, was anyone here already familiar with all of them? No, I thought not. We need to recognize that that's cause for concern. Stories are powerful. To the best of my knowledge, only human beings tell stories. There are personal stories, the stories that we tell to ourselves or tell about ourselves. There are family stories, stories that describe who is part of a family and what they do together that confers family status. Sometimes they're simple, like my father telling me that Morgans, my maiden name, like black pepper on their corn on the cob. I had just peppered my ear of corn and was getting some grief for it from the non-pepper-loving contingent, aka my brother, at the table. And I recall feeling affirmed and included by my father's statement. I have eaten my corn on the cob with black pepper ever since. Sometimes family stories are complex and change the course of their members' lives. The royal family in Great Britain is a great example of that. Even down to the color of the fingernail polish that the women are allowed to wear. Countless details of their lives are dictated by the story of what it means to be part of the royal family. Sometimes it works well, other times it ends in tragedy. Most of our families will fall somewhere along the spectrum, hopefully without the trauma and tragedy of the late Princess of Wales. There are also cultural stories. Stories about the history and growth of particular cultures, sometimes as nations or empires, and other times as underground or alternative communities. Regardless of which culture we identify with, there are stories to guide us, to shape us, to include us, or not. 'Cause sometimes the stories are about who to exclude, who to cast out, who to regard as the enemy. There are also scientific stories, points of view and paradigms for living that the science of the day supports with rigorous data. In the moment, they express the truth as people know it. But even scientific stories change as science itself changes, and those changes in that story affect countless lives. Once upon a time, eating eggs, especially farm fresh eggs, on a daily basis was considered the foundation for physical health. But then as the nation urbanized, we had commercials on TV about the incredible edible egg. Do you remember those? It was like a magic show and the egg would appear, encouraging us to eat eggs. Then came the scientific exploration of cholesterol, and eggs were out. No more than 2 per week were permitted for good health. And now we are back to being advised to eat eggs more regularly than that, up to 5 or 7 times a week. The scientific story of the egg has affected people's dietary choices, their nutritional status, the economics of the egg industry, etc., 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 in ways that seem far-fetched sometimes, because stories are very complex. What stories have shaped you? There's the old question about which book you would most want to have with you if you were stranded on a deserted island. So think about it for a minute. Which story is most important in your life? It could be in any of the categories that I've mentioned, or something entirely different. For example, I didn't mention literature as a category, or religious stories, but both are powerful for both groups and individuals. Do you have a particular book from childhood or any other time in your life that has had a powerful influence on you? Or a story that someone shared with you? Many of us have many stories and would be hard put to name just one to take to that mythical deserted island. But think about what yours are. And think about the flip side of the coin. What if you had no stories? Or at least no stories that you could safely tell or share? What if there was no cultural story to guide you? No story to claim you as part of it? No story to point to and say, that's me. I'm going to be like that. For people who are not part of the dominant groups in a culture, that's often their lived experience. We all need stories to design ourselves and our lives by. we all need to tell stories too. American culture has just barely begun to edit and revise its stories to make them more complete and more honest. We've started to face the fact that truth matters. A foundation of stories based on or including lies will not bear the weight a culture builds on it. Eventually, the lies will corrode the whole structure and the culture fails. Now sometimes the lies are lies of commission, lies told specifically and intentionally to change difficult or painful facts. Sometimes the lies are lies of omission. The truth is just left out because, as Al Gore pointed out, it's inconvenient. Coming to grips with this is part of our current cultural angst over critical race theory. People are banning books and insisting that critical race theory not be used to tell the stories of our nation. It's a really big deal, and it really does matter. It's the difference between the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and a bunch of bald-faced lies. So bear with me for a moment. I'm going to give you a description, a definition of critical race theory, also known simply as CRT. Critical race theory is a cross-disciplinary, intellectual and social movement of civil rights scholars and activists who examine the intersection of race and law in the United States and challenge mainstream American liberal approaches to racial justice. That applies to many, if not most of us. The word critical in its name is an academic term that refers to critical thinking, critical theory, and scholarly criticism. It is not criticizing or blaming individual people. It began in the 1960s like other critical schools of thought. There is a critical school of legal stuff and critical biblical studies and critical all kinds of things, which refers to the process of how they're examined. It became a movement at Harvard University in the 1980s. Scholars of critical race theory view race as a social construct with no biological basis, which scientists support. One point of CRT is that racism and uneven racial outcomes are the result of complex, changing, and often subtle social and institutional dynamics, rather than explicit and intentional prejudices of individuals. Critical race theory scholars argue that the idea of race advances the interests of white people at the expense of people of color, and that the liberal idea of our United States law as neutral plays a significant role in maintaining a racially unjust social order. Now, that's a mouthful. It boils down to race matters. Our perception of and response to race matters. It matters even, or perhaps especially, when we don't even think it's in play. And it's a constant variable that needs to be accounted for in American life. A constant variable means it's always constantly in play as one of the factors in our social and legal lives. It also has a massive effect on all of us personally, even, again, if we're completely unaware of it. To the consternation of many, critical race theory is not just an academic issue. Once you recognize that race is the elephant in the room of every history book, you realize that your treasured stories about your culture may be more fiction than fact. And if that's so, the truth needs to be told, which is going to change our cultural stories. Right now, there are at least 20 states with some form of pending legislation that would ban the teaching of critical race theory or its insights in public school. On the one hand, that makes perfect sense. Critical race theory is not taught in public school because developing brains aren't capable of absorbing and working with the complex structures that the theory addresses. But the insights from it, they change history as we know it. And to ban those means to uphold the lies. And so that is significant. We do not surrender our stories easily. Look, for example, at the story of the first Thanksgiving that has long been told, and I will bet almost all of us have grown up with, that included turkey and pumpkin pie being handed around the table of pilgrims and Indians all seated happily together. Or how long the grisly treatment of indigenous people by Christopher Columbus was kept mum. Because seriously, who wants to explain to third graders that Columbus cut off the hands of the native people who had no gold to give him? How do we tell that part of the story of his discovery of more land on earth and celebrate in any way? The people who wrote the history books in my elementary school simply omitted that detail completely. A lie of omission, and focused on the great discovery of what came to be known as the Americas. It has been said that history books are written by the victors. Amen, that is true. Seldom do we find a state-approved history that accurately documents the traumas of conquest from the perspective of the victims. Slaves didn't get to write their own stories. They were subsumed into the stories of their owners. I noted when I was researching stories for this morning's service that I had forgotten. Slaves had the surname of their owners. They didn't even get to write their own names. Why? Why were they subsumed into the owners' stories? Because sometimes the truth hurts. It hurts to be confronted with our own greed and heinous behavior toward those who have what we want. What people are protesting in regard to critical race theory is bringing the truth to light. They are reacting to the truth with grief and fear. Because sometimes the story is awful. The true story may be horrible. It's not noble. People disregarded the rights and worth of other people because it suited them to do so. In their own time, that was understood to simply be the way of the world, regrettable, but necessary for progress to happen. Of course, progress itself was defined by the conquering victor, not the victims, not ever. So when we come to critical race theory and examining the role that race and racism have, we are confronted with a whole set of new stories. Many of them are horrible. Others are fantastic stories about wonderful events and people that were never publicly told before. None of us had heard these stories before. Some people grieve the loss of previously inspiring stories. Others are angry at being deprived of the true stories due to the corruption of racist influences. And pretty much everyone is grieving something. So, what are we going to do? Well, for openers, we don't shut critical race theory down. We shut down the lies that haunt us and search for the true stories that we can actually live by. As UUs, we embrace our first two principles and employ them all the time. Treating all people in keeping with their inherent worth and dignity, and employing justice, equity, and compassion in human relations is a 24/7 commitment. There are no exceptions. That goes for enemies and racist folks also. We cannot accept them out of those that we treat with inherent worth and dignity. That means factoring race into our awareness of everything. And yes, it is more work for those who haven't had to do that before. But this is the work of editing and rewriting our stories so that they tell the truth. It's how we write and tell stories that shape the future that we dream of. Sorry, I'm of the opinion this morning that every word matters. As UUs, we study, we talk, and we face unpleasant truths together. This past fall, we held a series of classes titled AWARE. AWARE is an acronym for the All right, we'll swap it out and see if that works. AWARE is an acronym for the Alliance of White Racists Everywhere.
Anti-racist.
I'm sorry. Yeah, thank you. I'm glad you're on it. That's really good. We're just going to go with that was a test and you all passed. It is an acronym for the Alliance of White Anti-Racists Everywhere. We explored material that caused us pain. White privilege is an offense to humanity, so that we could learn how to begin to right the wrongs in the stories of our culture, how to begin to live into truth, especially when it challenges us at the core of ourselves. The stories of Black History Month, the stories of racism, the stories of how America responds to race in the here and now. These are true stories that we need. We need them to live by, to help us write new and better chapters. Part of what AWARE did was make us more aware of the stories we tell ourselves and their impact on ourselves and the larger world. That can be painful. It can also be inspiring. Author Philip Pullman has said, "Stories are the most important things in the world. Without stories, we would not be human at all." I hope that we are all still writing our own stories, that we're open to new truths, no matter how unsettling they are, and that we are willing to edit and rewrite and recheck our sources over and over and over until the story we tell is true. That's the only way that our dreams of justice, equity, and compassion will ever come true. Shalom. Our last story for this morning is true and heartwarming. Donna will share it with us now.
My story is about Emma Dupree, who lived from 1897 to 1996. She was a Black herbalist whose work touched countless lives in her rural North Carolina community. Self-described as a different child since birth, Emma spent her youth roaming the woods and the banks of the Tar River in Falkland, North Carolina. Gathering secondhand, she learned to identify the native plants that surrounded her home. As she grew, she broadened her knowledge of both body systems and health. Supportive plants through her experience assisting local health workers. She quickly established herself as a well-learned herbalist, and much later, granny woman, a title given to older folk healers, most often herbalists, midwives, or both in Appalachia. As her appreciation for the gifts of the plant world deepened, it became immediately clear that her own innate gift was to share the bounties of herbalism with all who crossed her path. Along with her husband and 5 children in tow, Emma moved from Falkland to the not-so-distant Fountain, North Carolina in the 1930s, where she remained for the rest of her life, practicing her traditional herbal ways all the while. Emma served friends, neighbors, and even mailed out herbs to folks as needed. Emma wasn't one to turn away anyone who knocked on her door, even if she wasn't sure whether or not she could help. Known for her potent 9-herb tonic, she would stow herbal preparations in repurposed jars and jugs, and in lieu of affixing a label to her mixtures, Emma would only verbally instruct folks on their suggested use. In this way, she built and maintained strong one-on-one connections with members of her community. If you were running to Emma for help, you were expected to listen and remember. Emma didn't set a price for her herbal services, but was happy to accept offerings of ingredients she needed for her work, such as lemons, vinegar, rock candy, honey, and molasses. In 1984, Emma received the Brown Hudson Award from the North Carolina Folklore Society, which recognized her as an individual who made significant contributions to the transmission, appreciation, and observance of traditional culture and folk life in North Carolina. A few years before her passing, she was also awarded the North Carolina Heritage Award, a lifetime achievement recognition for notable traditional folk artists in North Carolina. Perhaps the happiest honor of all for Emma was being made the Grand Marshal of the local Fountain Christmas Parade at age 94. Emma Dupree was 99 when she died. May we learn from and remember Emma Dupree.
Emma's photo is down here on our table. You can actually see her. So feel free to come and check her out after we close out our service. I'm keenly aware that time is an issue and that we don't have time for discussion, but I seriously and sincerely hope that we have stimulated a whole lot of thought amongst ourselves this morning. I do want to sing our last hymn. It is number 169, We Shall Overcome. I'm keenly aware that it's most often perceived as a song for people of color to sing in protest of oppressive conditions. I think we need to sing it about overcoming ourselves and our history that we have inherited. So number 169. We shall overcome. We shall overcome.
shall live in peace. We shall live in peace someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall live in peace someday.
And now if you would pick up your bulletin and join me in the words as Kathy extinguishes our chalice.
Wait, we have to finish.
Thank you. As our flame is extinguished, we hold its teachings in our hearts. May we live up to all that we have embraced and affirmed by its light.
Shalom.
May our lives create the reality our spirits dream of. May our dreams shape new communities over all the earth. May all the communities of earth join together in justice, equity, and equality for all. Someday, may we all overcome. Shalom. And now if you face each other across the aisle, we'll do Go Now in Peace.
Hey, come stand on this way. Ready?
Go now in peace, go now in peace. May the spirit of love surround you everywhere, everywhere you may go.
Thank you.